How could something so historically important just be forgotten?
Yes, this is really a mystery.
Beneath the Vatican, hidden from sight for millennia, archaeologists have uncovered a secret that could rewrite history. Deep under the sacred halls lies a temple older than Rome itself, a place shrouded in mystery and untouched by time. Stone chambers, cryptic carvings, and ancient relics hint at a civilization lost to history. As experts peel back layers of earth and time, every finding raises more questions than answers. Join us as we find out what civilization built it and why it was buried beneath the heart of Christendom. Secrets beneath St. Peter's. Tension was spreading across the world as 1939 pushed forward. Nations were building up armies, leaders were sending out warnings, and people everywhere were trying to figure out what might happen next. Europe felt like it was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to slip into chaos. In the middle of all this fear, something important was also unfolding inside Vatican City. Behind those ancient walls, a chapter was closing. Pope Pius XI had passed away, leaving behind a final wish that looked simple but would soon grow into something far greater than anyone expected. His wish was to be placed in the Vatican grottos, the large underground area beneath St. Peter's Basilica. This space held the tombs of popes, saints, and ancient rulers, and he wanted his resting place to be near the tomb of Pius X, a pope he had admired deeply. The request looked humble, almost ordinary, but the basilica was already crowded, and making space for a new tomb meant the workers would have to change part of the structure. When Pius XII became the new pope, he told the Vatican's architects to go ahead with the plan. However, the moment they looked at the drawings, the team knew they were about to step into something that could stir up trouble, shake old stones loose, and open up forgotten secrets. The chief architect, Enrico Pietro Galeazzi, studied the ground beneath the grottos and realized he would have to lower the floor to create enough room. This was not like digging up a normal basement. They were directly under the main altar of the biggest church in the world. Right above them stood Michelangelo's dome, a masterpiece weighing tens of millions of pounds. Close by stood Bernini's baldacchino, a giant bronze structure that towered over the altar like a guardian made of metal. If the workers messed up even a little, if they knocked down a wrong support or misread a measurement, the damage could spread upward and take down priceless art that defined the Renaissance. The task could not be handed to just any workers, so it was given to the Sampietrini, a small, elite group of craftsmen who had been trusted with the care of St. Peter's for generations. Many of them had grown up watching their fathers and grandfathers take care of the basilica. These knew every corner, every crack, every hidden passage. They were trained to move slowly, think ahead, and carry out delicate tasks without drawing attention. They worked quietly, using shovels, pickaxes, and buckets, and they stepped into the dark underground spaces as war clouds gathered over Europe. They were told to keep everything private, to shut out questions, and to carry on as if they were handling a simple repair. As soon as the digging began, the workers sensed something unusual under the soil. Their tools struck something curved and hard. They cleared away more dirt and found the top of an old Roman arch. This discovery made the team stop in their tracks. Galeazzi was brought down to look at it, and soon the Pope himself was told what they had uncovered. People had spoken for centuries about the layers beneath the basilica, but no one in modern times had actually seen them. The workers had broken through the floor of the current crypt and found themselves standing on the remains of a structure from the 4th century church built by Emperor Constantine. That ancient church, according to tradition, had been placed directly over a giant pagan cemetery. That cemetery was believed to contain something sacred, the resting place of St. Peter, the first pope. This possibility changed everything. Pius XII, known for his thin, intense appearance and his deep spiritual nature, realized this was no longer a simple matter of making space for a tomb. He decided the team would dig deeper, open up the buried rooms, and search through the ancient layers. While the world outside was breaking apart in war, the Vatican was beginning another kind of battle. To guide the project, Pius XII chose Monsignor Ludwig Koss, the administrator of St. Peter's. Koss was not trained as an archaeologist. He was a priest, a planner, and a man known for his loyalty to the Vatican. He was selected because he could keep secrets, follow orders, and keep the project under control. Koss then gathered 4 of Italy's best archaeologists to join the mission. They would bring their knowledge, while Kas would keep the final decision-making power. Together, they would pull up deeper layers of the ancient world, the hidden city of the dead. For 10 long years, while the world outside tore itself apart in war, a small hidden team worked under the Vatican. They stayed out of sight, far from gunfire and bombing raids, but they faced their own kind of danger beneath the stone floors of St. Peter's. The mission was so secret that most of the priests, guards, and even high-ranking church officials walking above them had no idea what was happening right below their feet. Down in the damp tunnels, only a few trusted men kept the secret alive. The work was slow and full of risk. Every time they swung a pickaxe or moved a chunk of rock, they had to make sure they didn't weaken the foundation that held up the basilica. To stop the structure from cracking or sinking, they put in steel beams and poured in concrete to hold everything firm. The air down there was heavy and thick, filled with the smell of wet soil and dust. They had to light lamps' faces and keep pushing deeper into the ground, not sure what they would run into next. Then came the moment that changed everything. What they uncovered was not a small tomb or even a single chamber. It turned out to be an entire underground city. Beneath the basilica, hidden for 1,600 years, lay a narrow Roman street lined with ancient mausoleums. They had stumbled upon the necropolis, the fabled city of the dead described in old records. Emperor Constantine's builders had buried it long ago when they filled in the ground to build the first St. Peter's Basilica. Now, that buried city began to rise again from its sleep. The discovery was beyond what anyone had imagined. The walls came alive with color as they brushed away the dirt. They saw mosaic floors made of tiny stones, shining in red, gold, and green. Frescoes of peacocks, vines, and ancient gods covered the plaster. There were family tombs belonging to the Valerii, the Marsi, the Caednae, names that had vanished from memory centuries ago. These were wealthy Roman families who had built miniature houses for their deceased loved ones. They had filled them with beauty and art, never knowing that one day their family plots would lie beneath the holiest church on earth. The place was more like a silent neighborhood than a burial site, perfectly preserved under layers of time and faith. The deeper they went, the more wonders they pulled out of the shadows. They came across small niches that once held statues, stone altars stained with offerings, and ancient drainage channels carved for the old ritual of libation. Families would pour wine and honey through those holes as gifts for the spirits below. Some tombs still had urns sealed with ashes inside. Inscriptions carved into marble walls spoke from another world, telling stories of love, loss, and remembrance. One grave belonging to Gaius Valerius Herma showed a detailed mosaic of a man racing a chariot, full of motion even after centuries underground. Another message, rough and plain, warned future visitors to respect the tomb and not desecrate it. A reminder that even ancient Rome had its share of problems with disrespectful passers-by. They found sculptures of Roman gods, including Bacchus, the god of wine, still standing watch beside faded offerings. The air down there seemed thick with history, as if time itself had been trapped inside the walls. It was like stepping straight into the 2nd century, when Rome was alive with wealth, worship, and superstition. The Vatican workers could hardly believe it. A pagan city lying directly under the altar where the Pope gave Mass. But in the midst of all this grandeur and pagan beauty, the team was searching for something else. They weren't digging for marble or mosaics. They were after one particular grave, small, simple, and poor. Tradition said it should lie right in the center of this forgotten city, the resting place of a humble fisherman from Galilee who had changed the course of history, St. Peter himself. The search had moved beyond archaeology. It had become a quest to touch the foundation of faith. Still, the men working underground had no idea that the ground they were tearing into carried a reputation that stretched back long before Christianity, long before Rome itself was born. The ancient people had once called it Ager Vaticanus, or Vatican Hill, and for centuries no Roman had wanted to live there. Even before emperors built palaces, before temples rose across the Tiber, this place was seen as dangerous, charged with unseen energy. The name Vaticanus itself hinted at something older than Latin. Its roots didn't belong to the Roman tongue at all. Scholars who studied the word traced it back to the mysterious Etruscans, the powerful civilization that ruled central Italy before the Romans came to power. The Etruscans had their own language, their own rituals, and their own gods. And they had given the early Romans nearly everything: their arches, their omens, their gladiator games, even their religious customs. The Etruscan word vites meant soothsayer, a prophet who could see beyond the physical world. That one clue suggested that from the very start, Vatican Hill had been known as the Hill of Prophecy, a sacred ground where people believed the veil between life and death grew thin. It was a place where voices from the other side might be heard. For that reason, the early Romans stayed away, and yet by a strange twist of fate, that spot would one day become the exact place where faith and mystery met. Vatican Hill before Christianity. The land around Vatican Hill did not start out grand or holy. It began as a swampy piece of ground that sat on the western edge of the Tiber River, a place the early Romans avoided whenever they could. The river kept rising and spilling over its banks, turning the area into muddy pools that swallowed up anything left on the surface. Because this land sat outside the ancient sacred boundary called the Pomerium, nobody felt truly safe there. The place was blamed for sickness, heavy air, and swarms of insects that moved through the wet marsh. Writers from Rome's early days talked about this land with irritation. The historian Tacitus said the place made people ill, while the poet Martial joked about the bitter wine that came from its slopes. It was damp, uncomfortable, and full of trouble. But the bad weather and sickness were only part of the problem. The Romans believed the hill carried a strange energy, something spiritual that made their skin crawl. People whispered that unusual gods lived in the soil, watching anyone who stepped near. The Romans, known for their superstitions, stayed away from anything that felt cursed. To them, Vatican Hill was a spot where the world above and the world below touched. It felt wild and dangerous, a place where a normal person could walk in but not always feel the same when walking out. Long before Rome became the power it would eventually become, another civilization had already claimed the hill. The Etruscans, who ruled much of central Italy before the Romans rose to power, used Vatican Hill as a sacred ground. They walked up the slopes as early as the 8th century BC, right around the time the legendary founders Romulus and Remus were said to be building Rome. These Etruscan priests watched the flight of birds and read patterns in the sky, believing the hill opened a path to messages from the gods. They carried out sacrifices, performed open-air rituals, and set up altars. The Romans later looked back on these practices with troubled minds. They feared the Etruscan spirits that still clung to the land and believed the old religion had left behind marks that never faded. Yet the Etruscan presence was not the strangest force on Vatican Hill. In the 2nd century BC, Rome was facing serious military problems. Battles were going badly, and fear was spreading through the Republic. The leaders turned to their Sibylline books, ancient texts filled with prophecies, to find guidance. The books told them to bring in a new goddess from distant lands. This was Cybele, also called the Great Mother, a powerful deity from Phrygia in what is now Turkey. So the Romans shipped her image across the sea and built a temple for her on Vatican Hill. It became known as the Phrygianum. This was not a peaceful religion. It brought noise, wild emotion, and rituals unlike anything the Romans had ever witnessed. Cybele's priests, called the Galli, carried out ceremonies that shocked even seasoned Romans. They beat drums, clashed cymbals, and played high-pitched pipes until they fell into deep trances. Their dancing spun out of control as they worked themselves up, crying out and harming themselves. The chaos drew crowds, but it also made Rome's lawmakers nervous. For many years, Roman citizens were banned from joining the priesthood because the rites were too extreme. Still, the cult grew. The Phrygianum stayed active for centuries and promised its followers rebirth and eternal life. When the Vatican excavators dug under St. Peter's in the 1940s, they were working directly above or very near the remains of this temple, even if they did not realize it at first. But the Phrygianum was not the only spiritual force that once shaped the hill. Another religion had strengthened its hold on Rome in the early centuries AD. This was the cult of Mithras, a faith brought to Rome by soldiers who served across Persia and the East. Mithraism operated in secret. Its members built underground temples called Mithraea that were shaped like caves. Followers gathered inside, away from public view, and carried out their rituals, which often included the symbolic sacrifice of a bull. Archaeologists later uncovered a Mithraic temple under the Church of San Clemente, only a short distance from Vatican Hill. Because these secret temples were common across Rome, many historians believe that one might still lie beneath the unexcavated sections of Vatican Hill, waiting for someone to break through and bring it back into the light. What makes this even more striking is that Mithraism and Christianity were rivals during the same era. Both faiths offered a path to salvation. Both used ritual meals. Both talked about eternal life. They appealed to similar people, especially soldiers and workers searching for meaning. It is incredible to imagine these two religions battling for followers in the same city, perhaps even on the same hill. When you put together the Etruscan priests, the swampy ground, the wild temple of Cybele, and the dark Mithraic caves, Vatican Hill starts to look less like a normal piece of land and more like a gateway. It was a mystical crossroads filled with old gods and old fears, long before the first Christian ever walked across it. This strange past makes it even more surprising that an emperor would choose it as the site for entertainment. But that is exactly what happened. The pagan hill, Rome's dark playground. Emperor Caligula, known for his cruel and unpredictable behavior, looked at this spiritually charged hill and decided to build a private circus on it. He ordered workers to fill in parts of the swamp, clear out sections of land, and set up an arena where chariots could race and crowds could gather. His successor, Nero, expanded it and turned it into the famous Circus of Nero. People crowded the stands to watch games, celebrations, and punishments. The hill that once frightened the Romans now filled up with cheering and shouting. The truth is, Caligula seemed drawn to dark and strange places. The hill's reputation, instead of scaring him off, pulled him in. He saw the land as a perfect backdrop for dramatic shows, harsh punishments, and wild displays of imperial power. The excavators working in the 20th century were digging through soil that had absorbed centuries of rituals, sacrifices, races, ashes, and blood. They were cutting down through the layers of the ancient world. To make this new circus stand out, Caligula looked for a centerpiece that would lift the whole place up and turn it into a grand display of power. He ordered his engineers to move across lands and seas to bring back something remarkable. Those engineers made their way to Heliopolis in Egypt, a massive religious city filled with temples and ancient symbols. They targeted one object, a giant red granite obelisk carved from a single piece of stone. This sculpture weighed more than 700,000 pounds and rose over 80 feet into the sky. They pulled it out of the temple grounds, forced it onto a specially made ship, and pushed the limits of engineering to haul it away. This ship had to be so strong and so wide that, after the transport mission, it ended up being filled with concrete and later used as the base of a lighthouse. When the engineers set the obelisk onto the vessel, they worked to keep it steady and to guide the ship as it set out across the Mediterranean. The journey brought the huge monument toward Rome, and once it arrived, workers used ropes, levers, and every technique they could think of to raise it up in the center of Caligula's circus. They placed it on the spina, the long central barrier of the racetrack. It stood over the chariots and crowds like a silent guardian, and that enormous stone never left. It stayed on the hill through every change in power. Today, people see it standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square, even though most no longer think about how it got there. When Caligula later passed away, Nero became the next emperor. He took control of the circus and the gardens around it, and soon his name became forever linked with the place. In the year 64 AD, disaster swept through the city of Rome. A huge fire broke out and moved through the streets for 6 long days. 10 of the city's 14 districts suffered terrible damage. Homes, markets, shrines, and public buildings fell apart and turned into piles of ashes. People wandered through the burning areas trying to save whatever they could, but most lost everything. Anger spread through the crowd. They needed someone to blame, and the ruler at the top of the empire became the easiest target. Nero heard the rumors that he had started the fire so he could rebuild the city according to his own ideas. His power felt like it was slipping, and he tried to pull it back by finding someone else to take the blame. He looked around and settled on the Christians, a small group that had been growing in number but still seemed strange to many people. Nero ordered soldiers to round them up, drag them away, and accuse them of terrible things. He used the circus on Vatican Hill as the stage for these punishments, turning it into a place of fear. The cruelty that followed shocked even hardened Roman citizens. Some prisoners were covered with animal skins and pushed out to be torn apart by dogs. Others were tied up and burned to give light during Nero's nighttime gatherings. It became a place filled with suffering, meant to scare anyone who followed the new faith. Many early Christians believed that Peter, the leader of their community, was among those arrested. Since he was not a Roman citizen, he received the same sentence as many others: death on a cross. The story passed down through Christian tradition says that Peter asked to be placed upside down because he did not feel worthy to end in the same way as his master. His end, according to this tradition, took place right there in the circus, near the giant Egyptian obelisk. That moment changed the future of the hill. Even though the land was still used as a burial ground for those who followed the old religions, it now held significance for the small Christian community. They saw it as the place where their leader gave up his life. Over the next 2 centuries, as more people joined the faith, families began to build tombs in the necropolis near the circus wall. They tried to get as close as possible to the spot where they believed Peter had passed away. The necropolis grew as a network of streets, tombs, and shrines, all pressed against the circus structure. When excavators in the 1940s arrived to uncover the buried remains, they were searching for the place where the 2 histories met, the pagan burial grounds and the circus that had held the early Christian executions. They wanted to follow the path of stones and walls back to the center of everything. Bit by bit, each clue brought them closer to the place where both worlds touched. All that remained was to uncover the person whose demise had drawn the first believers there and shaped the future of the hill. The Trophy of Gaius, Signs and Clues. The workers and archaeologists kept moving through the underground paths, clearing out dust, lifting stones, and brushing off ancient surfaces as they pushed deeper into the hidden city beneath the basilica. They had uncovered rows of pagan tombs lined up against each other. They had even exposed the foundation wall of Nero's circus, the same place where early Christians believed terrible events once took place. All of this felt extraordinary, but the team knew that these discoveries were not the heart of their assignment. They had a different goal pushing them forward. Pope Pius XII wanted one answer, and he wanted it badly. He asked over and over if the remains of Peter truly rested under the basilica. Monsignor Cass, directing the small group of stubborn and often quarreling archaeologists, guided their tools toward a very specific location. This spot lay almost exactly beneath the high altar of the church, an area called the Confessio. For 16 centuries, tradition had pointed toward that place as the center of everything. When the team reached that section of the cemetery, they realized something unusual was happening in the layout. The expensive stone mausoleums, with their carved decorations and carefully arranged spaces, suddenly came to an end. Around one small open-air patch, the grand tomb seemed to pull back, forming a loose boundary. The soil in the center was plain and rough. Some on the team wondered if it had been set aside out of respect, while others thought it might simply have belonged to poorer families. As they worked through the rubble packed in during Constantine's construction, the group uncovered something that caused them to freeze. A wall appeared, built around the year 160 AD and coated in faded red paint. It was not just another wall. It held back the hillside and supported the cemetery. But more importantly, built into its structure was a small shrine. The shrine took shape as a stone table resting on 2 short pillars placed within a niche. It looked almost like a simple display shelf, positioned carefully as if meant to draw attention. The team had a feeling that this might be the long-talked-about Trophy of Gaius. A Christian priest named Gaius, writing around 200 AD, once described monuments in Rome that honored the apostles who had shaped the early community. He mentioned that visitors could go to the Vatican area and see markers showing their victories of faith. A trophy, or trophion, meant a memorial raised to celebrate a triumph. The small shrine matched the ancient description, the location, and the expected time period so perfectly that the team felt sure they were standing in front of the memorial described almost 18 centuries earlier. As if this were not enough, the surface of the wall was covered with thin markings left by unknown hands. These markings were not recent. They had been carved into the plaster more than 1,700 years earlier. The people who made them had slipped into the pagan cemetery during a time when following Christ could bring punishment. They had walked through danger just to leave a few words or symbols. The messages appeared in Greek and Latin, short and urgent. The symbols included a fish, an anchor, and the first two Greek letters of Christ's name, all of them secret signs used by the early community. The team realized they were brushing dust off an ancient record left behind by believers who came quietly to honor Peter on a hill ruled by fear. The Christians had chosen this spot deliberately, guided by memory and tradition. The shrine, however, was only a memorial. It did not hold the body itself. The archaeologists believed the actual grave lay directly beneath it, but unfortunately when they dug below the shrine, they found a simple dirt grave. It was empty. This moment brought confusion and tension to the group because Monsignor Cas, the man leading the project, was not trained as a scientist. He had stepped into the dig driven by deep belief, and now he stood facing a mystery that pulled both faith and archaeology into the same narrow space: the breaking of the secret code. While digging deeper into the necropolis, the team stumbled across another tomb tucked away among the pagan mausoleums. In this particular tomb, they uncovered a jumble of bones piled together. Monsignor Cas became convinced that these were the remains they had been seeking for so long. He thought he had finally found Peter. Acting quickly, he had the bones secretly removed from the tomb, packed into a box, and stashed in his private office. He barely told anyone, insisting he was protecting the relics from the scientists who might mishandle them. The professional archaeologists, including Dr. Antonio Ferrua and Dr. Bruno Apollon-Getty, were outraged when they learned what Cas had done. They knew immediately that these bones were almost certainly not Peter's. The tomb was pagan, and the bones were mixed with remains from multiple individuals. When they eventually tested the set of bones Cas had hidden, the results were shocking. They came from three separate creatures. One was a woman, another a man, and the third was, unbelievably, a pig. Yes, the Monsignor in charge of the dig had been secretly keeping pig bones in his office. It was an utter disaster. The project, which had shown so much promise, had suddenly fallen into chaos. The single set of bones that Cas had hoarded turned out to be completely useless. The excavation had uncovered incredible things: the necropolis, the trophy of Gaius, ancient Christian graffiti, but the one thing it had set out to find seemed lost. The hope that had kept the team going was fading fast. Meanwhile, the truth was closer than anyone realized. Earlier in the dig, Dr. Apollon-Getty, working with a trusted laborer named Giovanni Sagoni, had been clearing away debris near the trophy of Gaius. While carefully removing stones and rubble, they stumbled across a small hidden niche built into the wall directly under the red shrine. The niche was lined with marble, tucked out of sight, and packed tightly with bones. It seemed deliberately hidden, almost as if someone had meant to protect it for the future. But Cas, obsessed with the bones he had already claimed, dismissed this discovery. He barely glanced at the niche and instructed Sagoni to gather the bones, put them in a box, and store them somewhere safe. Obediently, Sagoni wrapped up the bones, placed them in a wooden box, and tucked it into a damp, neglected closet in the grottos beneath the basilica. There the box sat, forgotten and ignored, for 10 long years. During that time, the bones, the most important Christian relics in the world, sat gathering dust, hidden in a place no one thought to check. The team had been looking in all the wrong spots, and yet the secret had been silently waiting in the forgotten box. Meanwhile, the excavation was officially declared complete. The war had ended, and the dig had come to a close. In 1950, Pope Pius XII made a cautious announcement in his Christmas radio message. He declared that the Trapeum, the memorial of St. Peter, had been found. The words fascinated the world, but he did not claim that the bones themselves had been uncovered. The public's curiosity surged, but the central mystery remained unsolved. It was at this moment that Margherita Guarducci entered the story. She was not part of the original excavation team, but she brought a different kind of expertise. Guarducci was a brilliant professor, tough-minded and intensely intelligent. Her specialty was epigraphy, the study of inscriptions, and she was considered one of the leading experts in the world. In the early 1950s, she received permission to go down into the necropolis herself. While the archaeologists had documented the graffiti, Guarducci believed the walls had stories they had not yet revealed. She suspected the earlier team had missed the real clues, focusing too much on the tombs themselves. For years, she worked in the cramped, damp underground space. She examined every scratch and every letter, studying the ancient markings with care. While others saw simple messages like, "Peter, pray for us," she noticed a more complex system of coded spiritual signs. Finally, her patience paid off. Near the red wall in the marble-lined mausoleum, she discovered a series of scratches that had almost been overlooked. At first glance, they seemed like a random jumble of letters, but she worked to decode them. Slowly, she realized it was an acrostic, a hidden message embedded in the letters. Her heart raced as she pieced it together. The words emerged, Petros ini, a Greek phrase meaning Peter is within. The message confirmed what had been hidden under the shrine all along, revealing that the most important secret had been quietly waiting for someone to read it. So, do you think the bones of Peter were finally uncovered? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.